Welcome to This Week in Local, a Localogy podcast featuring lively conversations about the local digital ecosystem, hosted by Localogy analysts Mike Boland and Charles Laughlin.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to This Week in Local. I'm Charles Laughlin, senior analyst at Localogy, joined by my co-host, Mike Boland. Mike, how are you doing today?
Hey, Charlie. Doing well.
Great. So what do you got, Mike?
So I'm looking at the news that TikTok has become one of the relatively few companies, and I guess by relative, I mean around 1,000, to develop a Vision Pro app. So sort of first out of the gate to invest time and resources to develop an app for this new sort of platform. And more so than like, hey, TikTok is developing a Vision Pro app. Isn't that interesting? It's sort of the deeper story of like the lessons from what they did and why and what we can take away from that. And also sort of a moment in time in terms of the trend of companies that are doing this. So I'll get into those deeper stories in a second. First of all, what do they do? It's a Vision Pro app. They made the choice that I think is the right choice to not just sort of port over their mobile UX, a scrolling feed over into the Vision Pro. So like, you're in this immersive environment, but then you have this rectangle in front of you that you scroll through. It's sort of reimagined for that particular form factor. So for example, you can look at your TikTok feed, on the moon or in front of Yellowstone or, just those sort of immersive environments. Now, that part is arguably kind of gimmicky. I think more importantly, what they've done is they've fundamentally changed the UX. And I think this is where the lesson lies. They realize that, when we're on a mobile device, it's great. We all carry them, but it's also a little bit claustrophobic. From a design perspective, there are a lot of trade-offs. Like, for example, whenever you want to see like the comments on a video or whenever you want to bounce off and see someone's profile, you leave the thing you were looking at behind. Or to see the comments or any other sort of elements, you have to scroll past the video and then the video's gone. So they decided to like utilize the elbow room, for lack of a better term, of this spatial environment. So to put that into practical terms and envision it, you're sitting there, you've got the Vision Pro on and you're looking at your just sort of immersive environment, whether you're fully dialed into like a, virtual environment or it's the sort of more mixed reality UX where you can see your room around you. Either way, you have sort of a larger TikTok window in front of you that sort of takes some of those UX elements and just throws them off to the side. Again, utilizing the greater sort of spatial capabilities of the device, so that it doesn't take you away from the video itself to do various things when you're in the app. So I think getting back to like what that represents, what's the lesson, is it's really about this sort of learning curve we're going to see play out, where it's about feeling out a new platform's, pros and cons and nuances and design language. And that was like a years-long process in the early days of the iPhone. That's probably the best example to point to. So the first few iPhone apps were sort of like, they didn't have that sort of native footing. They were just sort of like smaller websites or sort of like gimmicks, right? But then like a few years later, I pinpoint like around 2009, 2010, which was about 2 years after the App Store came out and 3 years after the iPhone itself came out, where we started to see apps that really had that sort of like native thinking. They tapped into the unique things the device could do. Foursquare, for example, utilized the GPS. Snapchat really leaned into the camera, and Shazam, like utilized the fact that there's a mic. And I think those apps really started to hit their stride, a few years after. So I think we're going to see that same learning curve happen with the Vision Pro as companies develop apps for it. What can it do that's unique? Rather than just taking our rectangle, scrolling whatever UX of our, iPhone app and then throwing it into that new environment. So I think the successful companies, as we've learned from history, are going to, again, do what TikTok has done here. Utilize that greater elbow room to just sort of make good use of the spaciousness of that, that environment, So I think we're going to see that play out. There's going to be lots of hits and misses as the playbook develops, and we'll be tracking that closely. What that means. What are the design language types of things that are going to become standards? And I think the fun part is we just don't know yet.
Okay, so a couple interesting things there. First of all, have we seen anyone come out? I mean, you say it's still early days for developing apps for this. That makes sense. We haven't seen yet the example of what you refer to as like just porting the website into that environment. We haven't seen a bad example yet among a notable player.
No, I haven't seen one that stuck out because I think the reason for that is it's pretty expensive to design for this new environment in terms of like the scarce talent that has that sort of spatial computing knowledge. So I think that companies that are going to make that investment aren't going to do that just to like port over their website, because they can actually reach that end in a much cheaper way, which is basically to market their, their website for people to find it on the Vision Pro. Vision Pro has a browser. You can go to any website through just like, sitting in your immersive environment by bringing up a just giant screen virtual monitor, open up Safari, and then, just jump on it. So I think that it's almost by default the bad practices haven't crept in because it's like just too expensive to do so.
Yeah, and to your initial point about the whole native thinking, maybe that native thinking is kind of a default position now, whereas when the iPhone came out, it was not.
Yeah, I think a lot of folks have learned their lesson. Yeah,
kind of thing. That's interesting. So, how does Apple, is this going to be just an App Store interface, just like with the iPhone, or how are people going to access apps through the Vision Pro?
That's a good question. So, like other devices, Apple devices that have these like iOS orbiting SDKs, like for example, on the Apple TV, there's tvOS. For the watch, there's watchOS. So that's the SDK that developers can grab and use in Vision Pro's calls. It's called Vision OS. It's like a iOS adjacent developer kit. So that's the first thing, is just like, developers using that sort of like, that's what gives them the native functionalities, using that specific tool. Okay. And Apple steers them in the right direction, right? In that the tools are, you can make buttons that are spatial as opposed to, 2D. But so anyway, there's that end of it. On the user end, there's an app store, and like again, there's 1,000 apps that have been created purpose-built in a native way for Vision Pro. Apple out of the gate, in order to just sort of pad their numbers and give people a reason to buy, has also said that it's compatible already with every app that has an iPad app. It's not, purpose-built for the device. It's not all of those sort of native thinking I mentioned, but at least there's a lot of stuff you can access, in addition to, again, the browser. But in terms of those spatial specific apps where they're in 3D, you're immersive, you're walking through them, there's 3D elements, that are the ones that are going to be built on Vision OS and available through the App Store. I don't know this for sure, but I imagine when you are in the Vision Pro and you fire up the App Store, it's going to know the device you're on and automatically suggest, well, here's the Vision Pro section of the App Store. And sort of, the App Store, we know it's a highly curated experience in terms of their most downloads and most popular and all. I'm sure there's like a section that they curate for that.
So you say they're compatible with existing iPad applications. Yep. If I'm an iPad user, no longer am, but I used to be, would this automatically sync through your Apple login?
I bet it would. Yeah. Like your previously purchased apps. Yeah, they'd show up there.
Okay. All right.
It's Apple after all. They're big on the sort of continuity.
Sure. You get a new device and your
sign in just rules all. Yeah. Your Apple ID rules all.
That is what makes Apple. That's why we keep using it. One of the reasons.
Yeah. Well, and also, frankly, that the Apple ID is interesting. It's part of their sort of digital rights management. Is one of the unsexy things they've revolutionized in like media and content, songs and movies and things. Like the fact that, there's one Apple ID and the digital rights management that goes along with it is one of the biggest sort of mechanisms of the Apple ID, but it's also something that provides continuity for the user in terms of from one device to the other.
The other thing I'm wondering is, you said there's 1,000 apps. I don't know if that sounds like a large number to some people. To me, that sounds like a drop in the bucket.
No, it's nothing.
Yeah. And
in like iPhone terms, it's nothing.
Sure. But given that we're still on version 1 of the Vision Pro, I don't remember if you've talked about in previous episodes how fast that iteration of versions will take place. But how many versions in before we see that scaling up of the number of apps, or do you have any sense of that?
I don't think it'll be a function of the version and the device itself and how advanced the device gets. I think it'll indirectly be that, but more so it will be when developers see there's a critical mass of users that makes their time and resources worthwhile to develop an app for, because there's a big enough audience to reach.
I guess I was thinking, how many versions in before we reach that audience?
Yeah. So a historical example, again, that's always a good, proxy to point to. With the iPhone, it wasn't until the iPhone 4 that the devices reached I always look at the magic number of devices as an install base as 100 million units. Because what happens after 100 million units is that developers will flock to that platform because there's a large enough audience attracting them. And then what you get is a lot more content because the developers are building stuff. And then users will then see all that content.
Well, then accelerates adoption further.
Yeah, it's sort of like an acceleration of flywheel effect. So then the time from 100 million to 200 million is a lot more accelerated because that sort of virtuous cycle kicks in of developers. It starts with developers. They get attracted to the platform because of the users, or I guess it starts with the users. It's sort of a chicken and egg thing. But then once all that content is there from that developer influx, then more users are attracted to the platform because there's more things to do on it. And then those greater numbers of users attract more developers, and around we go.
Yeah, fair enough. Okay, let's switch gears. I have a very different topic. I always do. It's kind of part of the brand of this podcast is that we have very different topics. A fintech company we follow on and off, Klarna, issued something very interesting this week. And it's interesting from a couple different angles, sort of the, is AI going to turn us all into UBI recipients angle, and also a little bit of a lesson in PR practice, best practice. So Klarna, about a year ago, launched a shopping agent, AI bot, essentially, built on ChatGPT. I think they launched it about a year ago. They just took it worldwide about a month ago after sort of testing it for a while. It sort of started out as something to help you pick products, what they called smooth shopping. It evolved relatively soon into basically its live agent customer support tool. And so and little context here, Klarna is hoping to go IPO this year. And this is a company that has had its valuation soar and crash, and it is famous for burning through just a lot of cash in the course of scaling. And so I think it's trying to tell the market that it is on a fast track toward efficiency and profitability. It's cut its loss significantly last year. And in announcing sort of the rollout of its chatbot, it wanted to make the point that this chatbot is driving efficiency, and I think it has a lot to do with being on the verge of an IPO. So, for example, they say that the efficiencies they're generating from using the chatbot basically as its customer support apparatus to handle refund requests, complaints, et cetera, that that's gonna put $40 million back on the bottom line. Basically, it's going to improve profitability by $40 million. I don't know if that means it makes it profitable, but it takes it $40 million closer to profitability is, I guess, the best way to put it. Now, what was interesting, well, a couple of things interesting here, is they basically said that 2/3 of all interactions of a customer service nature are now happening through this ChatGPT-based customer service bot. And they just flat out said, this does the work of 700 people. Now, that in alone sounds interesting. Okay. But what was noted and why this is kind of a PR misstep is that 700, it represents roughly, in rough terms, the amount of people Klarna laid off about a year ago. Now, apparently no one thought, if we say it does the work of 700 people, somebody at Fast Company or Yahoo Finance or somewhere is going to remember, did you guys listen? Yeah, let me go check how many people that was. It's about the same number of people. Bang, there's your headline. Okay? Now, I don't think they want that headline. I don't think anyone wants that headline. I think they want investors to know that they're driving efficiency. Okay, I get it. I think they want the world to know that their chatbot is just crushing it in terms of being effective. I don't think they want to have that comparison made in the headline of the 700 people. So, excuse me, that was, I think, a PR misstep on what otherwise is a pretty interesting announcement. And of course, it raises all the questions about, okay, it does the work of 700 people. Which 700 people? Well, it's probably third-party customer support agents is probably what it's replacing. And I think it's probably already replacing them. So that's, maybe not internal people, but that's a different conversation. But it's still another example of AI driving efficiency or AI leading the robot uprising, depending on your perspective. It kind of has both sides of that coin in this story. So that one jumped out at me this week, and I'm writing about it as we speak.
Yeah, they should have said 699.
Yeah. This week only. Yeah.
Yeah. So I get it. The operational efficiencies is like the perfect thing that you want to bring up as you're going into an IPO. Wall Street's going to want to see that operational efficiency, et cetera. That makes a lot of sense. But, I'm always skeptical of these sort of pre-IPO periods where there tends to be a lot of window dressing. The sort of classic historical example, of course, being, WeWork's claim that they're like, a tech company. They should be valued as a software company and as like a company that's elevating the world's consciousness, and all those sort of eye roll moments, as opposed to like, no, you're a real estate company, or Klarna, no, you are a, fintech. And but, I think that said, I think that they're making the right moves to convince Wall Street and other just IPO underwriters and everyone involved in that value chain that they're worthy of investment. So I think that's fine. We'll see what they continue to do, because I know their core business is a bit volatile with some of the more macroeconomic factors that they're susceptible to. So it makes sense.
We still haven't had the recession that's been talked about for, it seems like, years now.
Yeah.
But they're not just a U.S. They're a Swedish company. They trade everywhere, essentially.
Yep.
I think the U.S. is a huge portion of their business, but they're certainly economic cycle sensitive. They're interest rate sensitive. They're sensitive to a lot of cyclical factors. And they're facing a very skeptical investor community, not just because they're a fintech, not just because they're in the payment space, buy now, pay later, et cetera. But they've also have kind of a wild history of just, I forgot what their peak valuation was, but it was tens of billions. They've raised billions. They've gone through billions. I think there's a lot for them to prove to investors that they can run a tight ship and achieve profitability. So they've got a sort of a unique set of challenges in demonstrating that to investors. But this press release just hit me over the head. And again, that was pointed out to me again as I read the coverage and then read the press release, then went back and looked at the coverage. It was like somebody pulled out a pistol and pointed it at their foot with this one. And, whether it was a junior PR person whose work wasn't checked, who knows what happened, or if any heads are rolling. That's up to them. But it was a misstep. The story became the 700 people, not what Klarna has achieved with this rather rapid advancement of its AI-based customer support.
Yeah.
Which is an interesting story in itself.
That junior PR person now has
they're extra
whiplashes all over his or her back.
Yeah, it is. Like Mutiny on the Bounty. Yeah.
Metaphorically, of course.
Yeah.
We don't condone
we
physical abuse on the show.
Punishment in the workplace or anywhere, for that matter, on this podcast. But that was kind of what struck me this week. Mike, you have a Who on the Week?
Yeah, so I don't know if it says something about the state of the world, but this is the, third or fourth week in a row I'm exercising my sort of editorial license to flip Who Won the Week into a Who Lost the Week.
It's more fun.
So speaking of e-commerce, speaking of macroeconomic factors, Thrasio, and I'll get into who they are in a minute, has filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. They have raised over the last 2 years more than $3 billion in equity and debt, and now that they are filing Chapter 11 bankruptcy. This is another case of a sector that had sort of a major COVID boom, and then what goes up must come down type of thing. We've seen that to varying degrees in all corners of the SaaS world and fintech, as we just went over. What this one was particularly a little subsector that we wrote about a lot about 2 years ago, and I was calling it the great e-commerce roll-up of 2021. And there were just companies emerging everywhere that were these roll-ups of Amazon third-party sellers. And the thought was you sort of buy all of these sort of popular, sort of almost like Etsy shops, but not really, where they just have like a best of breed vertical focus and they operate on Amazon. These companies would sort of raise a bunch of money. It was very capital intensive because you had to buy all these. Yeah. And then the benefit is you realize all of these long-term unit economic benefits, such as, economies of scale and shared fixed costs and just sort of operational leverage just as sort of larger entities. The problem was there were a lot of macroeconomic effects that ensued. Economy softened, consumer spending going down, affected e-commerce spending. So a lot of their models didn't really pan out. And again, a very capital intensive front end to make all these investments. Mm-hmm. And then some of their models around their sort of returns and revenue growth didn't pan out. So there are a bunch of them. The reason I bring up Thrasio is it was sort of the poster child of this movement. And now it has sort of crashed and burned. So it's notable. And again, an example of one of those sort of COVID hangovers. Yeah. Coming to fruition.
Yeah, now that you talked about it, I remember one of us wrote about that. It was probably you, but I remember that story of the roll up of the small Amazon shops was a thing for a while. Yeah, okay, that's interesting. So I have a who won the week, and it's very quick. It's Thrive, the erstwhile directory publisher, now SaaS company, actually posted a 22% growth in its SaaS business for the full year. They announced that last week. So it's who won last week, I guess. It's interesting that, they a while back sort of put this marker where we're going to be $1 billion SaaS company by, I think it was 2027. And they're, a little more than a quarter way there. They still got 3 years to make up a lot of ground on that stake they planted in the ground. But they showed some progress in 2023. So I thought it was worth acknowledging. We're going to have Joe Walsh, by the way, the CEO of Thrive, do a fireside chat with me, by the way, at our upcoming L24 conference. And I think that's it. Mike, so you want to read us out?
Yeah. So thanks, Charlie. Thanks, everyone, for listening. This has been This Week in Local. Stay tuned every week for more episodes. You can find the show on all major podcast networks and find out more at localogy.com. So please subscribe, like, and comment. Your engagement helps others find us. And if you're interested in being a guest or sponsor, you can email us at podcast@localogy.com. So I'm Mike Boland with Charles Laughlin. Our producer is Dara Sweat. So thanks for listening and see you next week.
Thank you for tuning in to this week's episode of Localogy's This Week in Local with Mike Boland and Charles Laughlin. Be sure to subscribe for more.